Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on. Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I think we're going to hear a lot about in the coming months and possibly the coming years. And that is the topic of resiliency. Recording this on August 7th, 2024. And we have just recently been hearing about a lot of negative news as far as the ag industry goes. We're seeing large companies in the industry doing layoffs of over 100 people in specific sectors in their organizations. We have seen a 2-day drop in the cattle markets and a drop in the stock markets. And we are also looking at some not too appealing grain prices. Just diving into the numbers a little bit here. Kinze is laying off 193 people out of their plant in Williamsburg, Iowa. John Deere in Moline is also laying off 134 jobs in their seeding and cylinder sectors. Actually, in addition to 489 job cuts they made to salaried employees earlier this year. Agco also saw a 6% reduction, and they reported net sales of $3.2 billion in quarter two this year, which is a 15% drop from their quarter two last year. Agco's grain and protein business is also for sale. USDA is also discussing revising their 2023 net farm income figures, which would cause them to decrease because of grain that has not been marketed from last year's crop yet. This number for 2023 net farm income was already down 16% compared to 2022, and the estimations for 2024 net farm income are expected to see a 25.5% drop. These obviously are very significant drops, but they are also almost records. The last time that we saw a drop of this much in just a short period, this being a 2-year period, was in the 1970s. Look at percentage declines. This is even bigger of a concern. You have to go back to the early 1930s to find a bigger percentage decline of the nominal dollar drop in this short of a time period. Look at what kind of an impact that has on the farms themselves, other than that drop of income. On a long-term basis, it means that a lot of them are looking at refinancing debt that they already have and looking at how they can be more liquid to make themselves more sustainable. So those numbers came from Farm Journal, and I think that when you hear those numbers, it can be a little bit shell-shocking to hear that. First thing that I think that we can do as we hear these numbers coming in, and farm stuff doesn't make it in the media all that often, and the drama of it. So I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about these numbers over the next period of time here. And I think it's important to remember that when you let the news be your barometer for what kind of a situation you're in, things can start to look pretty bleak pretty fast, even if that's not necessarily the position you personally are in. So sometimes it's a good idea to turn off the news, turn off the markets, and focus on what's on your farm and what you have going on that day, what you can control. Certainly we want to be informed. Certainly we want to not just turn a blind eye to what's happening, but a certain level of cushion between that and what we are doing on a day-to-day basis is very healthy. Now, as far as the markets go, we all know that I believe the saying is what goes up must come down, but the vice versa of that is also true. What goes down must come up at some point. So our goal in these time periods is to make it through so that we get to see the upside of the market again and to have a product to market when the market turns around. Easier said than done, obviously. That term resiliency, I think keeping that at the forefront of our thought and how we are setting our mindset up to deal with the situation, which we don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know. It could be just a really quick drop. It could turn around really fast. We don't have a crystal ball that'll predict that. But our goal is to think critically and act confidently so that we can put ourselves in the best situation that we can to be resilient through this time. So we're going to talk about a few strategies and things that are in your control that you can do on your farm to try to set yourself up to be resilient through this time. And I think that applies to not only like what we're doing as a business, but what we're doing as people. Our mindset affects everything we do. The brain is such a powerful part of how we approach life and how we approach situations. So it's not just about keeping our farm or our business healthy. It's about keeping our mindset healthy so that we can approach situations in a manner that allows us to be problem solving and not just shut down or only see the negatives. Okay, so let's dive into a few of these ideas and approaches that we can hold and think about as we start to hear some of these numbers come in. The first one is not going to be new to anyone. It is diversification. And I think that can be looked at a lot of different ways. Obviously, diversifying your product is the first one and the most common one, but there's a lot of other ways you can diversify as well. Our main goal here is to increase the number of income streams that we have and also to potentially spread out the timing of those income streams. So diversification might mean adding on a hay business to your cow-calf business. It might mean having some of your meat go direct to consumer instead of selling all your calves to be fed out. It depends on your situation, and it requires you to look at the resources that you have available, the market opportunities that are in your area, and what you can feasibly do. It's hard to talk about diversification when we are looking at a downturn because a lot of times diversification requires a little bit of prior investment. Agritourism has been a great opportunity for diversification for a lot of businesses. Over the past 10 years, we've seen a big uptick in the number of farms that have agritourism ventures and are seeing income from that. That is one way to do it that may not require as much extra investment in your operation, depending on your current setup. It is challenging, though, because when we think about who the consumer or the customer of that business is, it's going to be a pretty price-sensitive market when we see this economic downturn also affecting just people who are not involved in agriculture as well. So that's something to consider. I think it's important during times like this to think about what industries or what niches do have money or who are less sensitive to the downturn and try to focus on ways that you might have a product or an experience or a service that would be of benefit to them. Thinking about repackaging or restructuring the things that you do to serve that person who may have a little bit more ability to invest in things during this time is going to serve you well. The next one that I want to look at is efficient resource management. So the idea here is that the easiest dollar to manage is the one that you've already made. It's also the cheapest because you've already made it. You don't have to continue to invest in something to make a future potential dollar. So we're looking at how to be good stewards of the resources that we have, how to be very efficient with our money, our time, the equipment that we already have. This is possibly a good time to be selling off equipment that you don't use as often. It's a good time to be thinking about how you can use resources in your area and have those conversations with your community about does every farmer in this area need a baler and a rake and all of the hay equipment? Or would it make more sense for us to work together and for one farmer to have that equipment and hire out his services to the surrounding farmers and for them to do the same with something else? Looking at how we can rely on each other and form more of a community around some of those pieces of equipment that are just expensive to have is a good way to manage our resources. Now, that being said, you obviously have to be able to sell the equipment at a price that makes sense to sell it at. And that's also challenging during economic downturn. But it is worth looking at and seeing what options you have. I like to think about when we think about this efficient resource management, it's really about being really clear on your numbers and your resources that you. So this is the time when you get out that spreadsheet, when you use your budget software or your QuickBooks or whatever you use on your farm to figure out exactly where you're at, how much you're spending on different inputs, how much you're making on different outputs, what the timing of those things are. Because a lot of times we do that math in our head. We're always running the numbers and we think we know, but sometimes seeing it on paper and knowing exactly where we stand is a little bit more of a helpful process. The other thing that we can start to think about here is what resources we've maybe stockpiled that we can start to use up and utilize without having to buy additional resources, whether that's feed or just anything that we've had in storage, anything that we can do to be more efficient with the resources that we already have. I have a plug here for the program I personally use to do this. It used to be free. It is a paid, or it still is partially free, but there's to get all the features, it is paid now. But it's called wave.com, and I will put that in the show notes. But it is actually an invoicing tool, but you can hook it to your bank accounts or upload your bank statements and it starts to categorize your expenses for you. And then you can go review them and make sure that it's categorizing them correctly. And it starts to give you some of these graphs and charts of what expenses you have and when and how they fit into the bigger picture. And so that is something that I have found very helpful in terms of just visually breaking these things down and thinking about, okay, we saw that we had a big increase of fuel during this time of year. Why was that? Did we need to do that? Or was that something that we did to try to take advantage of the lower price at that time? Things like, so being really familiar with your numbers, I think is one of the best ways that you can truly avoid just inefficient resource management and try to be more resilient during these times. Another thing that we can do is to try to change the product that we market. Now, I mentioned this a little bit already about diversification, but I think it's especially important with cattle, which I know a lot of you have, but really animals of any kind. If we have typically sold calves at a specific time of year, at a specific weight, or a specific age, thinking about how we could maybe get a little bit more value out of those calves, either by retaining them for longer, feeding them for longer, trying to sell them at a weight that is more sought after in the market, especially if we can do that at a point that is not as much additional input for us, then that is something that we can evaluate. Value added products is also something to consider. So just trying to own a little bit bigger piece of the pie as far as the production journey for your product can help you get some more value out of those products. This might also look like working with people who are local to you to process your food items, your products further versus just selling them to wherever you're taking them, trying to break them up into smaller chunks and work with more processors or more co-ops to get even a little bit of a price advantage on a section of your crop can really make a difference. We are often called a penny business. Agriculture is a penny business. So anywhere that we can find those pennies, we're going to be helping ourselves out and giving ourselves an advantage. Direct to consumer sales, I talked about this a little bit with the agritourism as well. It'll be interesting to me to see how the direct to consumer sales trends go over the next few years, because typically with consumers being more price sensitive during economic downturns, we see those products be less sought after because they're trying to be very economical, choosing food items that are maybe less high dollar as some of your local and direct to consumer products would be. But I think that this is something that we have a little bit of control over in how we talk about direct to consumer sales and how we portray them to customers. It's not just about the price. If you're doing marketing for direct to consumer goods, if you're making it about the price or just the product, then you're not really doing the whole job of marketing your product. So when we think about that, it's about the relationship you are building with that customer, and it's about providing them access to something that they may not be able to get anywhere else, whether we're talking about a specific product, a specific type of product, or even just a price point on a certain product. So thinking about not necessarily scarcity marketing, but truly helping your customers to understand the real value of your product. The value of your product is not just the value of the product itself. It is the value of everything that goes into your product. So when we think about that, we want to be sure that we are talking about, because you buy your beef from us, you know that you have a reliable source for beef that you can depend on, regardless of what happens in the market elsewhere. That's not necessarily fear-based marketing. It's talking about the assets, the opportunities that we have when we have a good relationship between a farmer and a consumer. The next thing that I think that we can do ties closely to our efficient resource management, and that is working with your financial management person or your tax professional. So this could be looking at tax incentives or tax breaks that you may not have taken advantage of in the past because you didn't have a reason to, or because you had other options, but continuously evaluating what your options are for that, making sure that whoever you're working with has a very clear picture of your finances, and letting them know that you are interested in finding those opportunities in your budget to make cuts or to figure out how you can position yourself best for the next tax season. And obviously, this is a contested topic. We don't want to farm just to try to lower our taxes, but I think it's a tool that we have and should consider whenever we get the opportunity to. Understanding how to manage the assets that we currently have in ways that are most advantageous to us is what we're looking at doing here. In the same vein as that, it is important to understand what kind of risk management tools we have available to us. Tools like crop insurance, futures contracts, LRP, anything that you haven't looked into or don't fully understand how it works. This is probably a time that you should see if these tools apply to you. We have not traditionally used risk management tools because they weren't a good fit for us, but I can guarantee you that we're going to be reevaluating that this year to see if they are, because making sure that our risk is at a comfortable level for us when we know that we're not going to have as much wiggle room is really important. We're looking at not necessarily having that profit to reinvest into the farm for the next few years at least, potentially. And so what we're really focused on is making sure that we don't lose a ton of money, so that we can continue to be able to have that production. So when the markets turn around, we are able to jump back in and be able to have that opportunity to reinvest in the farm again. But that is not always the story. So knowing how to manage your risk so that you're not necessarily looking for big loss and big gain, but trying to level that line a little bit here. The last one that I'm going to cover today, again, is not necessarily a strategic decision here, but really more of a managing your outlook on this topic. I think, in accordance with the name of this podcast, it is very important to have deep ties and a deep understanding of why you are doing the things that you are doing in your business. Not just because it makes money, not just because we're trying to build a business and stay on the farm or keep the farm in the family, but why you specifically enjoy your day-to-day tasks and how they give you a purpose and a mission and something that you're working towards in your life. I like to think of these difficult times in agriculture as the time that if you make it through, if you can be one of those businesses that doesn't go out of business during this time, when the markets go back up, you are set to really find success. That is when the next big businesses, the next successful farms are made, is when we get to that point of we see the other side and we are positioned well to act and have the resources and assets we need at that point to make a play when the markets turn around. So I don't know what the markets are going to do. I don't know what the economic state of our country or our industry is going to be. But I do know that we can be resilient and we can focus on the things that matter most to us, the things that we can control in our own operation, and make smart business decisions. Now, we can't control the outcome. We can't control what happens, but we can do the best to make the decisions that we can with the information that we have that support our mission and our goal for where we want to be down the road. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, sometimes it's good to put some distance between ourselves and that negative messaging, or that messaging that, hey, this is really hard, or hey, here's how bleak the outlook is. Sometimes we don't need to focus on that. We need to focus on doing the things that we do well, looking ahead to the future when we have opportunities to do better. Continuing to be focused on those things that put us in a negative mindset do not help us solve problems. It helps us focus on those problems even harder and create more stress and more negative impact on our family. This is a time when we want our family to be at its best, to be at our best, not constantly stressed out by our stress. So finding healthy ways to manage the stress from these kinds of situations and to focus on the things that really matter in life, your family, your friends, your community, the things that are on your farm that you enjoy are going to be incredibly important. Thanks so much for listening today. I hope that you take something from this episode and just consider it as you hear news that comes in over the next few weeks and we evaluate what kind of a situation we're looking at for farm income over the next couple years as the markets do what the markets do. And if you are having some experiences on your farm, or if you are finding opportunities that you think other people could benefit from, I would invite you to drop them in the Facebook group. I think that collaboration goes a long way in these times to help us control a bigger piece of the market as small independent farmers and make sure that we have those opportunities to grow in the future and not everybody has to sell out. That's an extreme statement, but I believe collaboration is good. Drop in the Facebook group. And if you wouldn't mind, I would love it if you would review the podcast on Apple Podcasts if you have enjoyed listening or have gotten anything out of the episodes that you have listened to. That's how my podcast can reach more people and can help support more people. So thanks so much. Have a great day.
If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.